Good morning, everyone. Thank you. Thank you for joining today's program. Today's program is titled Canadian Immigration Insights. It will unravel certain Canadian immigration policies and answer some of the most frequently asked questions about Canadian immigration, such as permanent residents, short-term residents, visitor visa, refugee claimants, and more. So our speaker today is ROCIC IRB, and a regulated Canadian immigration consultant. Shifoli Kapu. Shifoli, thank you for joining us today. And the floor is yours. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Nick. And thank you everybody for joining today. My name is Shifali Kapoor, as has been told to you in the introduction. I'm a regulated Canadian immigration consultant. And what that means is that anybody in Canada who provides any consultation or services for immigration purposes to people and charges a fee for it, they are required to obtain a license from the government before they can practice this profession. So nobody without a license should be giving any advice or providing you any services unless they're paralegal, or they're probably a lawyer, or they are a settlement agency. But again, in terms of the application process, you should only use a licensed practitioner, because you don't want to risk your application, because it's a one-time opportunity. It's a golden opportunity. You don't want to lose that chance. So always make sure that when you're using someone for anything related to immigration, you hire a licensed professional. So that's a brief introduction of myself. My company is T-Dot Immigration, and I am based in Toronto, Ontario. I've been practicing this profession for the last 7 years, and I have provided help to hundreds and hundreds of temporary residents in Canada, international students, workers, and people from outside Canada as well for permanent residents. And that could be from various programs that could be under, and we're going to talk about that in my slides going forward. But there are multiple programs under which one can get permanent residence in Canada. Now, that was about me. I'm just going to, my plan is to do a presentation for about 45 minutes. I'll talk about different ways that you can get permanent residence. I can tell you about different programs, what you should do, what you shouldn't do. And then I can probably take some questions from you all if you have any questions for me, in regards to your applications, if there are any ongoing, or in general, your concerns about immigration or how you can move to Canada. I don't really know where all you are based, but yeah. So looking at the presentation, how do people come to Canada? So what are the different ways that people can come to Canada? There are two different pathways under which one can come. A permanent residence pathway, where they can apply for permanent residence directly from their home country, or if they're inside Canada, and then temporary residence. Temporary residence could be visitor visa, study permit, and work permit. There are only 3 categories of temporary residence. For permanent residence, people can come under economic classes, people can come under family sponsorships, people can come under refugee programs, and then also humanitarian and compassionate grounds. Humanitarian and compassionate ground application is usually only completed when you're inside Canada, but all the other 3 programs can be done from outside Canada as well. If I talk a little bit in more detail about economic class immigration, the programs that are included under economic class programs are express entry applications. That is based on experience and education, and I'm going to talk more in detail about that. There are PNP programs, provincial nominee programs. If you follow Canadian immigration, you must have heard a lot of people talking about PNPs these days, provincial nominee programs, because express entry is untouchable. It has become extremely difficult to apply under express entry because of the high cutoffs. So people have started taking the assistance of the provincial nominee programs to apply for PR. And every province in Canada has a PNP program. They have an agreement with the Canadian government, and the Canadian government has allocated them limits of how many people can they sponsor or invite to Canada in 1 year period. So every province has a pathway for for provincial nomination and then permanent residence. Then under economic classes, we also have some pilot programs. We have the Rural Northern Immigration Program, which is usually for the rural communities. We have the Agri-Food Pilot, which is for people who work in the agriculture industry, and there are only certain industries and NOC codes that fit under that. Then we have the home care, child care, the home care pilot and the home child care pilot program. Also a very, very popular program for people to come to Canada under childcare services. So if they provide childcare to Canadian families, like nanny program, basically in simple terms. So that's a very popular program. It's a pilot program, which is set to expire this year. But most likely, because it's such a popular program, we will see that they'll extend it most likely, or maybe design a new program. And then finally, we have the Atlantic Immigration Program, which used to be a pilot up until last year. And they made it a permanent program because it was such a successful program that they made it a permanent program. So those programs fall under the economic classes. So where either you have a job offer, or you have experience, or you work in a high demand industry in Canada. So based on that, you can apply for permanent residence and be an economic contributor to Canadian economy. So you economically contribute to the Canadian economy, and that's why you come under the economic classes. The next category is family sponsorships. Under family sponsorships, basically, it's for people who have spouses or partners living in Canada, who are Canadian permanent residents or citizens. Then they can sponsor their partners, spouses, common law partners, or conjugal partners to get permanent residence in Canada based on their relationship. There is no need to prove economic support as such in terms of, like not economic support, but economic ability or economic contribution to Canada in that case. But it's more so about the legitimacy of the relationship, or you can say it's more about the bona fides of the relationship. And then children also get included in the same category. Canadian permanent residents and Canadian citizens can also sponsor their children to come to Canada as permanent residents. Then we have the refugee class applications. Now, there can be a refugee application when you're inside Canada. You can become a refugee claimant, or if you have been approved as a protected person or convention refugee by the United Nations, then you can come to Canada as a refugee as well. If you have any threat in your home country, or there's a threat to your life, and you fear that you will be killed, or you don't have any protection in your home country, so you can apply for refugee. From outside Canada, the process is pretty long and pretty complicated. It's not that fast. But if you're inside Canada, and you have enough documents and enough proofs to prove that your life is under threat in your home country and you cannot return, then you can apply for refugee when you're inside Canada. And that is a much faster program comparatively, as compared to coming from outside Canada. And then the last program under which one can apply for PR is the humanitarian and compassionate ground application, wherein people who have humanitarian reasons to apply, they're not eligible for permanent residence under any other category, not under economic classes, not under family sponsorships. They don't have any threat in their home country, so they can't apply under refugee programs. Those are the people that can apply under HNC. But under HNC also, there are certain factors that the Government of Canada looks for, based on which they will approve you for an HNC. And those factors primarily revolve under what are your hardships if you were to go back to your home country? What are What is your establishment in Canada? Like, have you already established yourself in Canada? Do you have a job? Do you have a home? Do you have any assets? Do you have a friend circle? Are you appreciated and loved in the community? Is the community supporting your application? Do you volunteer? Do you have any contribution towards your community in Canada? Are there any young children involved? So they look into the best interest of the children. So those are the factors. And then other factors like, you know, is there, you can also under agency seek exemptions that, you know, if there's a medical inadmissibility, you can seek an exemption for medical inadmissibility. If there's a criminal inadmissibility, not necessarily an agency exemption under the criminal inadmissibility, but minor issues, you can seek an exemption. So basically it depends. Agency is a discretionary application. There's no law that applies to it. But if you have enough proofs to prove that you have sufficient humanitarian and compassionate grounds to stay in Canada, you seek an exemption from the minister to consider you under the agency and they approve you for PR. So that's the final pathway for permanent residence. Under temporary residence, now sometimes what happens is that people are not eligible to apply for permanent residence directly from their home country. So they try to find another way, another route to come to Canada. They come to Canada as temporary residents, and that could be come as a visitor, if you get a visitor visa approved, or it could be to come as a student. You get an admission in a college or a university in Canada, and you come to study here, and then based on that, you know, you can work your way towards permanent residence, in the way that a student, when they apply for study permit and is their college or university that they're going to is DLI that is eligible for PGWP, postgraduate work permit, then the applicant who comes to Canada on a study permit can come here, complete their study, get their diploma or the degree or certificate or whatever they're pursuing, and then apply for a postgraduate work permit. That's an open work permit that allows international students to work in Canada and gain Canadian experience. So the postgraduate work permit is for a particular duration, depending on the duration of your study. If your program of study is less than 1 or 2 years in duration, then you only get the study permit for the duration of, you only get the work permit for the duration of your study. So let's say you did a 1-year program, you get a 1-year work permit. You did a 16-month program, you get a 16-month work permit. But if you study a program which is 2 years or longer in duration, then you're eligible for a 3-year work permit, an open work permit which is valid for 3 years. Now, let's talk about recently IRCC made some changes that people, because sometimes what happens is that master's programs are very short in duration. They can sometimes be only 1 year in duration. And those people were only eligible for getting a 1-year work permit. But recently, the government changed that rule and said, starting February 15th, international students who are pursuing a master's degree in Canada with a duration of less than 2 years will still be eligible for a 3-year postgraduate work permit. And the reason why they did that was because they wanted to give the opportunity to master's degree graduates to gain valuable Canadian experience and, you know, integrate into the Canadian workforce easily, because a 3-year work permit will allow them a longer duration. So again, coming back to the benefit of a study permit. The benefit of coming to Canada as a student is that you can come and pursue Canadian education, and that increases your chances of permanent residence, not just through express entry, but also through the provincial nominee programs, depending on which province you go to pursue that program. So let's say you're pursuing a program of study in Alberta. So Alberta has various programs where you can apply for permanent residence based on experience or a job offer or even your education. And then similarly, Ontario. There's a program for international students. And then once you come to a province and you study, then when you get your work permit, because it's an open work permit, you can go to any province in Canada and get your Canadian experience. So let's say you come to a particular province like Ontario, but your work permit, so you complete your study and then you get a work permit, but you can't find a job, or there's no pathway for you to get permanent residence in Ontario. So you can move to another province in Canada and still be able to work for any employer, get your Canadian experience, and then eventually apply for permanent residence. Again, based on your eligibility under the program that you can apply to. So you can apply through Express Entry or you can apply through PNP. Again, depends on your eligibility, past experience, age, education, and all those factors. And then finally, a work permit. So work permit will be, so one option I gave you after the study permit, when you can get an open work permit, right? So postgraduate work permit allows you to work for any employer. The other option is that you find an employer in Canada and the employer wants to hire you, right? But you don't have a work permit in Canada and you are probably a visitor here, or you're even outside Canada and you want to work in Canada. In that case, you can't just directly come to Canada and apply for a work permit. You need an employer who can give you a job offer, which is also called as an arranged offer of employment. Now, there are two ways of doing it. One way is an LMIA, a labor market impact assessment. Now, what does a labor market impact assessment mean? That an employer says that I want to hire, this is my business, it's a legitimate business, and I want to hire a person to do a certain job. And I'll give you an example. Let's say it's a Nigerian restaurant, right? And this employer, the restaurant owner, wants to hire a cook. And the employer can't find a Canadian or a permanent resident to do that job. Now remember, that Canadian or permanent resident could be from the Nigerian ethnicity too. And that employer cannot find anybody to do that job. So they try to hire a temporary foreign worker. Anybody who's not a Canadian or a permanent resident and wants to work in Canada is either termed a foreign national or a temporary foreign worker. So now the employer says, I want to hire a temporary foreign worker, and for which, I need to get somebody a work permit. Now, just by giving an offer letter doesn't mean that you can apply for a work permit. The employer now goes to Service Canada and they apply for an LMIA, a labor market impact assessment. So the employer tells the ESTC officer, and I'm explaining this in very layman terms, like very simple language. So through the application, the employer tells ESTC or Service Canada officer that, listen, I tried to hire a Canadian or a permanent resident in the position of a cook for my restaurant, but I've not been able to hire anybody. So there's a shortage of labor in the position that I want to hire a person in. So I want to hire a temporary foreign worker from my home country so that person can come to Canada and work for me for a period of 1 year or 2 years or 3 years, depending on the position, the wage rate, and all of that. And then the ESTC assesses that application, and then they say, yeah, I don't think there's a negative impact. So it doesn't look like you're taking away a job from a Canadian and you're giving it to a temporary foreign worker. So I don't think there's a negative impact on the Canadian economy or the Canadian labor market, not the economy, the Canadian labor market. So because there's a neutral impact or a positive impact on the Canadian labor market, they approve the LMI. And then that applicant, the employer gives that LMI to that applicant, and that applicant then uses it to apply for a work permit, and they come to Canada and get an employer-specific work permit. So it's a closed work permit, and they work for their specific employer in Canada for the duration of the work permit. Now, the advantage of that is that your family, if you are on a closed work permit, your family can join you in Canada on an open work permit, and your children under the age of, basically children who are going to up to high school, up to secondary education, can get study permits to come and study in Canada. So if you're able to find an employer who can sponsor a job and you come to Canada on a work permit, your family can accompany you and come to Canada on work permits and study permits as well.
Interesting.
So that's about the LMI supported work permit. Now, some countries, like the European countries, South American countries, some countries, not all, some countries have signed treaties with Canada. It's called free trade agreements. Depending on your nationality, people can also get LMI exempt work permits. Okay? Or French speakers, francophones, people who speak English and French both, they can also get an LMI exempt work permit as long as they have a job offer in Canada. You still need a job offer. The only difference is that you don't have to go through that LMI process for certain nationalities. Some countries also have an agreement with Canada to come to get a working holiday visa. So a lot of European countries are included in that. That the applicants can apply for a work permit under a working holiday visa, which is an open work permit. I'm not going to go too much in detail about that, but if you need more information on that, I'm happy to personally answer that. We can set up a time for a consultation. I'm happy to offer free consultations to people who joined the seminar today. So we can probably give you a code and you can share that code with my office if you want to book a personal consultation. And I'll be happy to, guide you more into that. But I don't think so I need to discuss too much about LMI exempt work permits right now, because they might not directly, sort of be a favorable or a possible option for you. Now, the question comes now, visitor visas. I want to come back to visitor visa option. So people come to Canada. It's very common for people to come to Canada on visitor status. And then they like here, like, they like the culture, they like the lifestyle. So they want to apply, they want to stay here permanently, right? So they can apply for a study, they can convert their status to a student or a worker as well when they're in Canada. So they can continue to find an employer, and that employer can give them an LMI, and then they can convert their status to a worker, or they can even get an admission in a school, and then based on that, they can apply for a study permit in Canada. Now, recently, on January 22nd, there was some significant changes in Canada under the study permit rules. Significant changes. So what used to happen in the past is, and I'm going to go a little bit in the background. Back in the day, before COVID, actually up until 22nd January, there was never a limit on the number of international students who could come to Canada. Before COVID, things were pretty decent. Things were in control. There used to be about 350, 400,000 people who came to Canada as international students all over Canada. And that was a reasonable number, a decent number of people who could come to Canada. In COVID, the government closed all the port of entries. As a result, people from outside Canada were restricted to come to Canada. And there was a shortage of people who came as permanent residents because they stopped processing those applications. But international students were still coming. Now, because the permanent residence applications were delayed and people were not coming from outside Canada, and the Canadian government was only inviting people who were already inside Canada under Canadian Experience Class, there was a dearth of people to work in various jobs, because Canada fills a lot of jobs, skilled jobs, low-skilled jobs, semi-skilled jobs with use of temporary foreign workers. So that intake slowed because permanent residents from outside Canada stopped coming. The government went full gas, like they went all out with temporary residents coming to Canada. As a result, there was a huge influx of international students and temporary foreign workers in Canada between 2020 and 2024. In July of last year, there were almost 2.5 million temporary residents in Canada. That's a huge number, because The problem is, and I'm going to talk about that in the next slide, there is an allocation limit for every year for people to come to get permanent residence in Canada through all these programs of permanent residence. Every year, the limit changes, but only slightly. There's never a huge increase in the number of people who can become permanent residents. So, for example, this year we have 485,000 people who will get permanent residence in Canada through all these programs. So, if there were 2.5 million temporary residents in Canada, it's so evident that not all those 2.5 million people will get their PR. So that means 2 million people are going to struggle. Either they're not going to get PR, or they're going to get illegal. They're going to stay here unauthorized. Some of them will probably, very few will probably go back. But that's going to create a lot of nuisance in Canada because there's so many people who are out of status in Canada, right? So what government did on 22nd January, they introduced a cap on the number of international students who could come to Canada. So they said we are going to restrict that number to 360,000 only. So only 360,000 international students will finally, in the year of 2024, come to Canada to study. And how are they going to implement that? Because people can apply for study permit if they get a letter of acceptance from any school. So what they said was that every province will get a limit, an allocation limit of how many study permits they will be able to issue. And how is the are the schools going, the provinces going to keep a track of that? The provinces are going to issue provincial attestation letters to international students who are in possession of a letter of acceptance. Only after the international student gets the, sorry, not the international student, I shouldn't call them an international student, I should call them foreign nationals. When the foreign national gets a attestation letter from the province, only then they can submit their application for study permit. Once they apply for the study permit, based on the decision, whether it's an approval or a refusal, they come to Canada and they start their study. The number of applications that IRCC will be accepting is 605,000 applications. But out of that, IRCC anticipates that only 360,000 international students or study permits will actually be approved. Right? So 605 provincial attestation letters will be issued, but out of that, only 360,000 will finally come to Canada. Now, the government also says that there is a possibility that out of the 605, we don't reach the cap of 360. So that means what if more people are refused, right? So if that happens, then they will increase the allocation limit for the number of applications that they're going to take in. So if, let's say, they only get 350,000 people and we're falling short of 10,000 people, then the government will open more applications, or more provincial attestation letters will be issued to applicants so that they can apply, and then the government can achieve their the limit, the allocation limit. Now, how a lot of people have said, this is not a good move. This is ridiculous. Why would the government do such a radical change? Why would the government suddenly do this and introduce this measure? But if you ask me as an immigration consultant, as a practitioner of this immigration industry, I personally appreciate this change. And the reason why I appreciate this change is that currently there are so many temporary residents in Canada, and they are not getting a pathway to permanent residence. So it's extremely stressful and bothersome for those people because they have spent so much money to come to Canada already. They've spent almost 20,000 Canadian dollars to just complete, or maybe even more, to complete their program of study, and then the living costs and all of that. And now suddenly the government says, oh, we don't have a pathway for you. So in a way, government restricting the number of people to come to Canada under temporary residence is good, because then all the people who come to Canada, some way or the other, will be able to find a pathway for permanent residence for themselves. Because it's evident if 360,000 international students come to Canada in 1 year and the allocation limit for PR is 500,000, so pretty much all of those people will be at some point be able to apply for PR and be able to get, because the number of, the demand is lower than the supply. But current situation that we have right now is that the demand is insane, but the supply is very limited. And not everybody can get it. And that's why the express entry scores are so high. That's why it's so hard to get into the provincial nominee programs. That's why it's so hard to find a job right now in Canada. That's the reason it's so hard to find housing in Canada. So all of that is all, it's associated, and it's all goes hand in hand with the number of people who come to Canada every year. Now, so as an immigration practitioner, this might be a radical change. The government might not be ready with the plans right now because we don't have the process for provincial attestation letters currently. So which means that people are not able to apply for study permits from outside Canada. They're stuck in a situation, right? They already have, I get consultations from people from various countries, and they tell me that they have their approval letters, their letter of acceptances, but they can't apply for study visa because they don't have the provincial attestation letter yet, because the provinces haven't announced it. So all of that is okay. We understand that there's nuisance, but it's in the long run, it's going to be beneficial for everybody who comes to Canada or aspires to obtain permanent residence in Canada. So I'm going to, on that note, I'm going to go to the next slide. And if you see, this talks about the immigration levels for Canada between 2024 and 2026. So if you see under 2024, the overall planned permanent residence admissions for this year is 485,000. Out of that, 110,000 will be through federal high skill, which is express entry. Economic pilots, if you see the third category from the top, or the fourth category from the top, the economic pilots, which is the agri-food pilot, the rural northern immigration pilot, the economic mobility pathways project, will have 10,000 people. The Atlantic immigration program will have 6,500 intake, and then the PNP programs will have 110,000. So almost the same number of people will get PR through the PNP programs as many as through express entry, which I think is it's exceptionally good number, because then that really opens up opportunities for a lot of people to apply through PNPs and not just express entry. So I personally am a big fan of provincial nominee programs. And then the government of Canada is also giving a lot of attention and focus to French speakers, to Francophones. They intend to bring in almost 26,000 people under the French-speaking permanent resident category outside Quebec. After that, we have the family sponsorship, and we have about 82,000 people who will get PR through, I'm sorry, let me go back. Almost 82,000 people who will get permanent residence under family class sponsorship. And then the parents and grandparents, 32,000 people will get their PR. Parents and grandparents is also a great program in Canada. And I think it's a big advantage for people because if you come to Canada as a permanent resident, then you also have an opportunity at some point to sponsor your parents as permanent residents, and they can come to Canada. I think a lot of countries don't have that option. Canada is probably the only country that allows the parent-grandparent sponsorship as well. And I think it's a very, very high demand program in Canada. And that's why it's a lottery system as well. So it's first come, first serve. No, actually, it's not first come, first serve anymore. It's actually a lottery. I'm sorry. So people get to submit an expression of interest. And then if they get invited in the lottery, they can sponsor their parents for permanent residence in Canada. So that's with that. And then for 2025, we have 500,000 as the limit. And in 2026, also, Canada intends to bring in 500,000 people as permanent residents to Canada through all these different programs. Like I had mentioned initially, I covered that part, the economic classes, express entry, PNP programs, childcare provider pilot, home support worker pilot, agri-food pilot, Atlantic immigration program. and then the Rural Northern Immigration Program. Express entry, quick thing. It is basically for skilled workers who are inside or outside Canada, who want to permanently settle in Canada and participate in the Canadian economy. So basically, they are going to contribute to the Canadian economy by working, earning, and contributing to the taxes. It is a federal program, so it is the Government of Canada's program. It does not necessarily require a job offer. You are only assessed on the base of your age, your experience, your education, your language proficiency in Canada's 2 official languages. You could also just have proficiency in one of the Canada's official languages, which is English and French. There are 4 categories under express entry that one can apply under. It's called the Federal Skilled Worker, Canadian Experience Class, Federal Skilled Trades, and the PNP programs. Under the Federal Skilled Worker, the experience has to be from outside Canada, at least 1 year experience, and then, of course, your education, age, and language. Then Canadian Experience Class is for people who have Canadian experience. So basically, they're working in a high-skilled job in Canada. Then people under the Federal Skilled Trades program, people who have experience of at least 2 years and a certificate of qualification or an LMI from in one of the trade occupations. And there are certain occupations that are listed under the trades category only. And then the PNP programs. So there are some programs under PNP that give you support or the points under express entry, and you apply through the express entry program. And then there are some PNP programs which are non-express entry based programs. So you don't get to apply through express entry, but it's a non-express entry program and there's no point system for it. Now, under the express entry, IRCC also in the summer of 2023 introduced something called as occupation-based job. Now, that means that per people who have experience in certain high demand occupations like healthcare occupations, trade occupations, so manufacturing and construction, people in the IT sector, engineering sector, so basically STEM category, transport occupations, so truck drivers, airline workers like pilots, railway occupations. So those people, transport occupations, and then agriculture occupations. Those people, if people have experience in one of these occupations, they're also directly eligible to apply under this program, and they are being given priority. So right now, express entry scores, because it's a point-based system, are very high. But if you have experience in one of these occupations, you are given preference, and sometimes even if your score is lower, you can get invitation through this program directly. Again, keep in mind that these programs are there, but then ultimately everybody has to meet their own eligibility criteria. And there is a possibility that your score might not be up there and you might not receive an invitation. So there is a difference of being in the pool, being eligible and being in the pool of express entry, and then actually being invited under express entry and then apply for permanent residence. They're completely 2 different things. And then the last thing, the reason why there's such a high demand of Canada around the world, like we see that it's just getting so hard to get permanent residence. And that is because, because the demand is high and there's limited supply, because of the allocation limit and the supply of the programs, it's just difficult because there's so many people who want to apply for it, but there's not many spots available. So it's at present, Canada is all about survival of the fittest. So whoever is the bestest, if the cream gets it, or you're working in an industry that Canada wants. You have experience in an industry that Canada has extreme labor market shortages in, and Canada wants to grow that industry. And this will keep changing. At present, the occupations are in the healthcare sector, in the construction sector, in the manufacturing sector, in the technology sector. But going forward, that might change, right? And for that, it is very important that we keep ourselves informed and we keep ourselves aware if we are actually dreaming of Canadian permanent residence and aspiring for Canadian permanent residence. What is a provincial nominee program? A provincial nominee program is basically for workers or residents of a province who have high skills, education, and work experience to contribute to the economy of that specific province or territory. They want to live in that province and they want to become permanent residents of Canada in that province. Each province and territory has its own streams, and immigration programs also target certain groups. It could be based on your experience in that province. It could be based on your job, having a job offer in that province in a high demand industry. It could be just being a business person wanting to invest in that province. And then sometimes also for semi-skilled and low-skilled people who have job offers in that province. Like I said in the previous slide, PNP programs can be through a point-based system like express entry. Provinces could have their own point system also, wherein you submit an expression of interest, and then based on your points, you get an invitation to apply. And then PNPs can also be just outright job offer, apply for the PNP, get the approval, and then apply for PR through a non-express entry stream. And then we talk about the Atlantic Immigration Program. The Atlantic Immigration Program is basically for the Atlantic provinces. There are 5 Atlantic provinces, which includes, 4 Atlantic provinces: New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, and Newfoundland and Labrador. These Atlantic provinces have a program together, which is called the Atlantic Immigration Program. Now, apart from the Atlantic Immigration Program, which is a federal program, there's also individual PNP programs that all of these provinces have that you could apply under. But then the Atlantic Immigration Program is a program directly by IRCC, the Immigration Refugee Citizenship Canada, which allows people from outside or inside Canada, if they have a job offer from an approved or a designated employer in one of these provinces, and you meet the eligibility criteria, you can apply for a PR directly in Canada. And what's the eligibility? The eligibility is, first of all, experience. You need at least 1 year of experience in the last 5 years to apply for this. And that experience could be in any occupation. It could be in a Tier O occupation, Tier 1 occupation, Tier 2 occupation. Now, I don't know if you guys know about tiers, but tiers are basically national occupation. Every job in Canada has been given a certain 5-digit knock code. And IRCC identifies jobs by their duties. The duties that you perform in a certain occupation determines what category of the national occupation classification your job falls under. There are certain programs that only consider high-skilled jobs, which are Tier O, 1, 2, and 3 jobs for PR. But then there are PNP programs and federal programs that also consider your experience in Tier 4 and 5, which is semi and low-skilled positions, to apply for PR. So Atlantic Immigration Program is one of that program where, regardless of your experience in a tier, you can still apply for permanent residence through that program if you have a job offer from an approved or a designated employer in that community. Your education requirements should be at least a 1-year post-secondary education. It could be inside Canada or outside Canada. And then language requirements, you need to do a language test, which could be CLB 5 for a Tier O, 1, 2, 3 position, and a CLB 4 in a Tier 4 or 5 position. And the language test results should be at least 2 years old, like within the last 2 years. Now, language tests are for English and for French. There's CELPIP, IELTS, and recently PTE for PR. And then for French, we have TEF Canada and TCF Canada that people can do. Economic class, under Atlantic, there are certain international students from those provinces. If they've completed a minimum 2-year program in that community, then they're exempt for the experience requirement. So if you come to Canada to study in one of those provinces, then after completing your study, and if you have a job offer, you can directly apply under this program because you're exempted from the experience requirements. What's the process? You find an employer, you get a job. Of course, you make sure that you're eligible. You find an employer, get a job. The employer gets you an endorsement letter for the job from the community. Settlement agency helps you with the settlement plan for you to settle in that province. And then based on that endorsement letter and the settlement plan, you apply for permanent residence in Canada. Then we have the Agri-Food Pilot. This is basically for people who have at least 1 year of full-time experience in Canada in non-seasonal work in the past 3 years. So this is only for people who are already working inside Canada on an LMI-based work permit, and in certain eligible occupations and industries. So not all industries are eligible, not all occupations are eligible, only certain occupations and certain industries. Again, I'm not going to go too much into detail in this program because it's an extensive program. But if the Agri-Food Pilot is the program that interests you, book an appointment with me, and I'll be very happy to go over the program with you guys. The home childcare, the home support worker pilot and the childcare pilot. This is a great program for people who want to come to Canada to apply under as a caregiver. And that you could be a caregiver to children, or you could also be a caregiver to the elderly. People under the childcare provider pilot, so caregivers fall under the childcare provider pilot, and the home support worker pilot are for people who are giving care to the elderly. Now, what is the requirement of this program? The requirement of this program is that you have at least 1 year of post-secondary education and some experience or education in the field that you're going to work in, right? So either you prove your experience or you prove your education in that field, that you're able to provide support to those people. Work experience has to be 1 year, and that work experience has to be inside Canada. This work experience used to be 2 years in the past, but last year in April, they changed it to 1 year experience. Also because this program is set to expire in June of this year, right? So there's only 1 year experience requirement right now. The beauty of this program is that you can apply from outside Canada if you have a job offer. And when you apply for this program, if you're eligible, you basically get you get assessed for PR directly, even when you don't have the experience. You just get assessed for permanent residence, that after 1 year, when you've completed your experience, you will be eligible for PR. So you apply for that program, and then based on your job offer, and then the IRCC issues you an occupation-based work permit. So basically they give you, okay, we give you a work permit to come to Canada and work in this occupation, complete your experience, and then you send us your experience documents, and we will approve your permanent residence in Canada. So what people do is they apply for this program, they get their occupation-based work permit, their partner and children also are eligible to come. The whole family comes to Canada. Now, if you come to Canada and your employer says, oh, I don't want you anymore, just because you have an occupation-based work permit, you can work for another employer in the same occupation, complete your experience, and after 1 year, send your experience to the IRCC and get your permanent residence in Canada. So you're not restricted to only work for one employer. You can work for some other employer as well if things are not working out with the employer who originally gave you the job offer, which is not usually possible when you do an LMI, because in an LMI, your job is restricted to that specific employer. You can only work for that employer legally. But with this category of program, you get an occupation-based work permit, and you can work for any employer in Canada in the same industry. You can't change the occupation. You have to, if you're coming as a childcare provider, you have to work as a childcare provider. If you're coming as a home support worker to give care to elderly, that's how you come and you give them, that's how you get your experience. Now, the negative of that program, there's also a negative. It's a first come, first serve basis program. So the program opens every year on January 1st, and it literally closes within, like this year, it closed within 3 hours, right? And they only take 2,700 applications. So it's a very difficult program to get into because of the huge demand for the program. But again, if you have a job offer from somebody in Canada, an employer in Canada, you are able to apply. So this is a great program that you can consider. Then we have the Rural and Northern Immigration Program, which also is for the rural communities. There are only certain communities that are currently eligible for this program. You need 1 year experience in the past 3 years in an occupation, and it can be any occupation, tier O, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. And the experience has to be over a 12-month period, so 1560 in a 1 year period, and there can be gaps as well. And the experience can be inside or outside Canada, doesn't matter. Again, if you're an international student from one of those communities, then you're exempted from the work experience requirement, just like the Atlantic Immigration Program. I'm going to show you the communities.
You said if you're a student outside of these communities, what communities are you referring to?
Yeah, I got to that slide just now. These are the communities. Only these communities. In Ontario, we have North Bay, Sudbury, Timmins, Sault Ste. Marie, and Thunder Bay. So only these 5 communities in Ontario are currently approved. Now, this program is also coming up for expiration this year. But again, it's a popular program, so it looks like that they're going to extend this program as well. But as of right now, this is also expiring this year because it's a pilot program. Then we have Brandon, in Manitoba, we have 2 communities, Brandon and Altona Rhineland. In Saskatchewan, there's Moose Jaw. In Alberta, we have Clare's Home. And in BC, we have Vernon and West Kootenay. So only these, and there's links for all of these communities. You can go on their websites as well and see the program requirements and everything. But if you get a job offer from one of these communities, then you can apply for the rural immigration pilot as well. And then it's the PNP programs. Now, these programs are in full detail. It's all here in the slides. Like I said, I'm not going to go because it's already 10:56. I want to take some questions as well. So I'm just going to briefly tell you that every province, like I said in the beginning, has a program, multiple programs. Some are based on work experience, some are based on education, some are based on work experience in high occupation industries, and some in just having an experience in that province. So based on your eligibility in that province, you can apply for permanent residence. Some provinces accept experience from outside the province as well, and some require you to obtain experience in that province itself. So again, based on your eligibility, you can consider applying under one of the PNP programs. So that is all the programs, and you will have the access to this slide. I'm going to quickly talk about family sponsorships. So briefly, if the sponsor must be a Canadian citizen or permanent resident and must be at least 18 years of age and be financially stable. When I say financially stable, it does not mean that they have to have a job, not necessarily, but they need to have at least, they shouldn't have filed for bankruptcy. They shouldn't have any, immigration loans on them. They shouldn't have any other, bad debt or any childcare arrears, child support areas or things like that. If they're financially stable, there's no negative financial issues, and they can support their partner, then there is no as such minimum income requirement, but just to prove that they will be able to support their family by maybe providing a job offer letter or employment letter, notice of assessment, and things like that. What's the sponsorship process? The 2 components, there's a sponsor and a sponsored person. The sponsor submits an application to IRCC that they want to sponsor their partner. They provide all the relevant documents. The sponsor submits the sponsored person must pass the medical and the admissibility checks, the criminality checks, and they must be admissible to Canada. And then there is a sponsorship agreement. The sponsor commits to providing financial support for the sponsored person. This includes basic needs such as food, clothing, and shelter. And then the spousal or common law partner sponsorships require 3-year financial undertaking. So the partner who's sponsoring their partner outside Canada or inside Canada they sign a 3-year financial undertaking. So that means that they are responsible for that person's basic needs financially for at least 3 years. So if that person in that 3 years goes on any kind of a social assistance, then the sponsor who sponsored them is responsible to pay that money back to the government, because the government is going to come after that for that money. People can be common law partners. That means they've been living together, not married, but have lived together at least for 1 year at a stretch, under the same roof as a couple, just like a married couple, and they have to prove that their marriage is genuine, and they prove that with documentation, like their pictures and chats and contact history, and any travels together, any financial support to each other, social media screenshots, letters from relatives and friends supporting their relationship. So those kind of things. They can show shared utility bills like gas, electricity, joint accounts, joint utility bills, driver's licenses, insurance. So lots of documents to prove the relationship. So that was about the sponsorship applications. Under the the parent sponsorship, I told you, you don't necessarily have to provide documents to prove relationship except birth certificate, but you have to meet an income requirement. You must meet 3 years of income requirement consecutive. And if you do that, then you can submit an application for sponsoring your parents, basically an expression of interest. And then if you get invited, you apply for permanent residence for them. And then a visitor visa. If you're from a visa required country and you plan to visit Canada, then you must apply for a visitor visa. Most visitors can stay up to 6 months in Canada to stretch. There's also something called as a transit visa. If people are transiting through Canada, if you have to transit through Canada, you need a transit visa. And then an ETA is for people who are from a visa exempt country. But still, in order to come to Canada as a visitor, you must apply for an ETA, which is called an electronic travel authorization, to come to Canada. Work permits, we've talked. There's employer-specific work permits, and then there's open work permits. I've discussed about an LMI as well. It's an employer's process. The employer applies for the LMI for the applicant. Once they get the LMI approved, they give the LMI to the applicant, and then they apply for the work permit. Another good thing about an LMI is that the LMI can also get you additional points under express entry for arranged employment. And you can get additional 50 points that helps you increase your CRS score. Open work permit, I told you, when you have a permit, then your spouse or partner can also get an open work permit to come to Canada. We discussed about study permits, that you can come to Canada if you're enrolled in a DLI, you have enough money to pay for your tuition fees, your living expenses for yourself and your family members, and you have the money to also purchase return transportation for yourself and your family membership, for your family members. You have to have no criminal records, so must get a police certificate. You must do a medical exam if you're coming to Canada. And you must prove to the officer in your application that your intention is only temporary and that you will return back to your home country after you complete your program of study. Even if you're eligible for a postgraduate work permit afterwards, in your application, it must show clearly that you will return to your home country. Otherwise, the visa officer will not approve your application. And how do you do that? Like, how do you prove? So basically, you do that in the form of your SOP, the statement of purpose, where you explain that how is this education that you're coming to pursue going to benefit you, and how are you going to use that education, or what is the demand of that education in your home country, and how are you going to go back and use it for your advantage. There's also a program called Student Direct Stream, which is basically only for people who are legal residents, not nationals, but legal residents of one of these following countries: Antigua and Barbuda, Brazil, China, Colombia, Costa Rica, India, Morocco, Pakistan, Peru, Philippines, Senegal, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Trinidad and Tobago, and Vietnam. So people who are residents of this country are eligible to apply under a program called Student Direct Stream, which is a faster processing of a study visa application. It has certain requirements of paying the full year tuition fee, doing a guaranteed investment certificate of $20,000. So those, and then minimum requirement of the language test. So those requirements have to be met. But if you are a resident of that one of these countries, you can apply under this program, and the chances of approval also are much higher than under a regular category. Okay. We discussed that. We discussed I talked about the cap, that the government announced that there will be a cap, which will result in only 36,000 approved applications, which is a decrease of 35% from 2023. And also some other changes that they announced were that graduate degree program holders will be able to apply for a 3-year permit, and then open work permits. Now, this is a big one. Before January, before this announcement was made, open work permits were also eligible to partners of international students. So if you were coming to study a diploma program or a certificate program or an undergraduate degree, your partners were also eligible for an open work permit while you were studying. But government has now changed that, and spouses of students who will be pursuing certificate programs, diploma programs, undergrad programs will not be eligible for work permits. Only spouses of international students in master's degree and doctoral programs will be eligible for a postgraduate work permit. And for open work permit. Nobody else. So the spouses of international students will only be able to come to Canada after their partners have then received the postgraduate work permits.
Oh my goodness.
So that's about that. That was my presentation. We're at 11:05. I'm open to taking questions.
Thank you. Thank you. Shifoli. Wonderful. Thank you. That is so beautiful, well presented. Thank you. I have some questions I wrote down here. What do you mean by open work permits? What is the differences between this open work permit and a selected work permits?
So open work permit gives the authorization to the foreign national to work for any employer anywhere in Canada, any occupation, any industry, any province or territory. It does not restrict their employment, whereas an employer-specific work permit restricts the applicant to only work for the employer that gave them that job and whose name is written on their work permit.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you said that earlier. Yeah, I saw that. So what does that mean? Why the rural areas?
So you know how everybody, when they come to Canada, they come to Ontario, they come to Toronto, Mississauga, Brampton, they go to BC and they go to Vancouver and the Greater Vancouver area, or they go to Alberta and they only go to Calgary and Edmonton. So the government wants that there's so much opportunity for growth in these smaller communities. There are employers in these smaller communities who struggle to get people to work for them. They don't have people working. Like there are, for example, in North Ontario, we have the mining industry, right? And those people don't get people to work for them. It's so hard for those employers to find people. So in order to help those employers to find employees to work for them, the government introduced programs that will allow these people to these employers to fill their jobs. And so as a reward, you can say, the government said, we'll give you permanent residence easily. You go and work in those communities and we'll give you your PR easily. And the good thing with PR is that it's non-conditional. No matter where you get your PR from, whether you get it from Alberta, one of the rural communities, from a different city, from Alberta, Saskatchewan, any province, your PR is not conditional. It's not that you can only live in that province for the rest of your life. Once you become a permanent resident, there's something called a Canadian Charter of Human Rights, which grants mobility rights to every permanent resident. So basically, if you're not, if you've got your permanent residence in that province and you're not settling there, or you're not comfortable, or you have other issues, or you have health issues, or you have for livelihood, you don't think that you're getting enough opportunities, you are free to move to any province in Canada after you get your PR. But I always like to say that it is our moral duty And it is our responsibility that if there is a community who has given you a permanent residence, who supported your PR, which wouldn't have been possible otherwise, then as an unsaid obligation, try and establish yourself in that province. Try to give back,
Exactly.
In life, it's about giving back. If you leave some, try to give back as well. So try to live in that community. But then if it comes down to the point that it's making your life difficult, you're free to move. You can go to any other community or any other province in Canada.
Yeah, got you. We all have the moral obligation to be fair in the system.
Exactly. Yeah. But there's nobody who's going to come and take your PR away because you didn't live in that community.
Exactly. So in this case, can somebody apply from outside Canada?
Yeah.
Apply for a job from outside Canada. So once the person got the employment, then it can process his or her visa with the embassy.
Yes. So what you can do is you can apply for the job. If you get the job, you apply for your PR, you get your endorsement, you apply for PR. And then once you have your file, you can also apply for a work permit in that case and come to Canada, work in Canada while your PR is in process.
Okay. So the person can come with only the visa, working visa. Then when he comes to Canada, he can process his PR, right?
Yes.
Oh, fantastic. So I think some questions are here. If anyone wants to ask question, please raise your hand. It's a question and answer period. Otherwise, I will read some of the questions here. I have asked my question up here. Okay, let me see the question. What is that? He said, I'm 44 years old and a bit to complete my postgraduate diploma in a project manager in April. The program is for a year, which means I will get 1 year PGWP. What does that mean?
Postgraduate work permit.
Okay. So what is the possibility of getting PRO with 1 year PGWP?
See, I'm going to give you two opinions. Okay. The first opinion is that 1 year work permit is very tight. Even if you're working in a high occupation industry or a high demand industry, a 1 year work permit is very tight because what's going to happen is that majority programs require you to have at least 1 year work experience. Now, if you apply for your PR, postgraduate work permit, and you have less than 1 year, if you can't complete your experience of 1 year because you don't know when you're going to get a job, when you start your job, will you be able to continue that job? What if a layoff happens? What if in between you lose your job? Then you will not be able to complete your 1 year experience. As a result, you will not be able to apply for your PR. And all the money and everything that you've spent so far will be wasted. My recommendation to you is that do another program, get your 3 year work permit, and then strategize of how you want to apply for PR. At least at that time, you will not be restricted or you will not be living with that fear that, oh my God, I only have 1 year. Oh my God, I only have 1 year. You will have enough time to strategize and plan and be at a comfortable space. With a 1 year work permit, and especially with the current Canadian work, like the job market, it's not practical that you'll get a job like literally tomorrow, because if this is how you want to proceed, then in my opinion, you should have the job the day you apply for your PGWP, because the day you apply for your PGWP, you can start counting your experience towards Canadian experience class. So the day you apply for your PGWP, you should have a full-time job. Now, this advice is based on the limited information I have from you, which means that you're saying that you did a 1 year program and you are going to get a 1 year postgraduate. I don't know what your IELTS score is. I don't know what your past education is. I don't know if you have foreign experience or not. I don't know if you have a job. I don't know what is your background experience. So based on that, I'll be able to probably give you a better advice. But just on the basis that you have a 1 year work permit is already giving me anxiety, because I think 1 year is a very, very limited time for you to do everything, to get your experience and then apply for your PR. And it's going to give you anxiety towards the end. And then you'll have to depend on an employer to give you an LMI or an LMI exempt like a work permit. So my suggestion to you is, if it is possible, and if you have the financial ability to do one more program, please do that. And if not, then you'll have to, really work quickly, and make sure that you have a job, work in a high occupation industry, probably consider some of the PNP programs where only 6 months experience is counted, or you can apply for the PNP based on your past experience. Yeah, so you'll have to strategize. It's going to be a hard one. And I'm happy to do a consultation for you as well if you want to book a consultation with my office.
Yeah, you said you're going to give us a code for
Yes, I'll
everyone.
probably email you the code and then you can send it to all participants.
Thank you so much. So there's one question here, a little bit funny as well. There's a question, I deleted it. I wanted to read it. Okay. Can a refugee claimant apply for permanent resident without attending hearing? Secondly, can someone who already have a visa from outside Canada apply for a job?
Yes. So a refugee claimant, in my experience, I've not seen anybody get their refugee claim approved or decision being made without an interview. It always happened. Even during COVID, they were doing virtual interviews. So it's very rare. Maybe if there's a severe disability issue or something like that and the person cannot attend, that's different. But in most cases, they do refugee hearings. Like there is a hearing that happens. I have never experienced a case where there's not been a hearing, unless there's disability issues, of course, where the person cannot talk. That's that. That's the question to your first answer to the first question. And the second question, can a person with a visitor visa apply for a work job?
Yes.
Yeah, you can. You can apply for a work visa if you have a visitor visa. That's fine.
From outside Canada, it's saying
Yes.
that
Yes.
can someone who already have a visa from outside Canada apply for a job?
Yes,
Right?
you can apply for a job. Yes, absolutely.
All right. So this program will be available
I have a
tomorrow.
question.